Hi everyone, this is Matt Alder. Recruiting Future is taking a couple of weeks off, and it's going to return the first week in September. But in the meantime, I've got some summer specials for you. As I don't need to tell you, AI is a massive topic at the moment, and that isn't going to change anytime soon. It's only going to get bigger and more important. So with that in mind, I really wanted to share my thoughts on where we are with AI at the moment, where it's going, and also share the outline of a framework that I've developed for strategic AI implementation in talent acquisition. Earlier in the summer, I was a podcast guest on the Saville Assessment Deep Dive podcast talking about all of those things. The host, Mullaney, asked such great questions that I thought I would just drop the whole episode into the Recruiting Future podcast feed for you all to take a listen to. So, with thanks to Hannah and the team at Saville Assessment, here is a deep dive into my take on AI and the future of talent acquisition.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we explore the hottest topics in the world of work today. In this episode, we're diving into AI. What's real? What's noise? And what do TA leaders really need to know right now? To help us cut through the buzz and get to the truth, we're joined by the wonderful Matt Alder, author, consultant, and host of one of the most listened to talent acquisition podcasts in the world, Recruiting Future. With over 25 years' experience in the industry, Matt truly is a leading voice on talent strategy. We'll be talking about where AI is making a real difference in hiring, the ethical pitfalls to watch out for, and what the future holds for recruiters, candidates, and hiring teams alike. Whether you're leading a TA function or just trying to hire smarter in a rapidly changing market, this is one conversation you don't want to miss. Matt, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Such a pleasure. Okay, Matt, what does the real world adoption of AI and talent acquisition look like right now, beyond the headlines?
Well, I think as the famous phrase goes, the future is here, but it's just not evenly distributed. It really depends. I think that there are some specific industries, some specific companies, some specific geographies where, they're kind of pushing things as far as they can at the cutting edge. I think for most employers, though, they're still very much not off the starting blocks. I think that a lot of companies are waiting for the software that they use to kind of lead them through the AI revolution, if that makes sense. So I think it's a variable picture, but I think the vast majority of organizations are sort of using AI by default rather than design at the moment, which is understandable, but possibly problematic as well in terms of not really fully making the most of technology or having a strategy in place to think about how they might do that.
And what needs to change? Why are they sitting back and waiting for the tech that they use to take them forwards? Why aren't they propelling themselves forwards?
Because nothing has ever hit us this quickly. Mm-hmm. So over the last 20 years, we've seen lots of different technological revolutions come into the workplace. So the internet, social media, the mobile internet, cloud computing, all those kind of things. And each one of those innovations has kind of had a faster and faster development curve and adoption curve, but nothing has been as quick as AI has in terms of how it's leaped forward in the last couple of years. Now, we've had various aspects of AI around us and in recruiting for a long time, but really the leap forward from the generative AI kind of revolution has been just too fast for people to get their heads around. So I think there's a problem with speed. I think people are worried about various aspects of it. Some companies have blanket policies; they don't let any of their employees use AI in any shape or form. So we're just at that kind of very early stage, but unfortunately the market and the technology is moving much quicker than we've ever experienced before.
Are we overwhelmed?
I would say so, yeah. And I think that we don't even really appreciate half of what's going on or half of what's possible at the moment. So we're probably overwhelmed, but we should probably be even more overwhelmed than we actually are.
And what do you do with that then?
Well, I think it's just really important to have a really curious mindset about this. I think that sometimes people will kind of block these things off or not explore them in the level of detail that they perhaps should. So I'd go back to a quote that Sam Altman from OpenAI said on a podcast with Bill Gates about 18 months ago, which was, over the next sort of 10 to 15 years, the AI revolution is going to go at an absolutely staggering pace. And if you have more than 10 or 15 years left in your career, this absolutely concerns you. So I think that there's that sense of urgency there that people really need to be exploring, be thinking about this, and really kind of getting their heads around what's possible. It's also very difficult because there's so much, I was going to say misinformation. It's not really misinformation, but there's so much speculation and marketing spin and people arguing about things that don't matter. There's just so much noise out there. I think it's very difficult to really get a sense of what's happening.
And how do you cut through that noise?
I think that and this is kind of really the sort of the mission of my podcast, is to look for stories, to look for where people are using this in practice, what's happening, what kind of results are they getting. Also, I think with HR and recruiting, we tend to be sort of behind the curve sometimes with adoption compared to other departments in the enterprise. So I think that you could take a good look at what's going on in finance, what's going on in marketing, what's going on in sales, and in most cases get a bit of a steer about how this technology is being used. So I think there's lots of sensible places to look beyond joining in the latest LinkedIn argument about will we be replaced by robots? Oh yes, we will. Oh no, we won't. The kind of pantomime style debate that tends to happen around this topic.
Indeed. Where do you think the use of AI might be falling short in hiring processes?
So I think that one of the problems with this is because it's moving so quickly, a lot of the promises made and discussions that's going on are really talking about technology that's not quite in the mainstream yet. So it might be here in a month, it might be here in 6 months, it might be here in a year. So I think that sometimes there are false expectations about what's possible. I also think that because there's been such a kind of a gold rush of software companies trying to sort of embed AI into their system somewhere, just so they can sort of put their hands up and say, we've got AI. Sometimes that's underwhelming or inappropriate or not very useful, and that can be really kind of disillusioning. So it's a combination of factors, I think, about hype and reality not meeting. But then in other places there are things going on that you could really see this kind of working well. So I think there's just this uneven distribution of technology, of understanding, of all those kind of things. And it's just a very complicated, nuanced position. And I think that as humans, we try and look for almost like a yes or no answer. It's like, does this work for hiring? Yes or no? And it's just very, very nuanced. And also it changes very, very quickly. So I'm fully comfortable, I think, that by the time this podcast comes out, some of the things that I've said might be out of date or, might never happen. Or I might have missed something blindingly obvious, because that's just the state of it at the moment. You have to have that kind of really kind of flexible way of thinking about this and not be afraid about being wrong. I think that's kind of an important aspect, which I think in business is a very difficult thing to do because, we're not really allowed to be wrong.
And in HR, perhaps an even more difficult thing to do, right?
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
1,000,000%.
Where have you seen it work really well?
So there are lots of different and interesting use cases. So at the basic level, we see people doing things like, automating the production of job adverts from job descriptions or automating job description production. And in some ways you kind of look at that and say, well, actually, shouldn't humans be doing this? But it's been an area that's been so problematic for so long. And anything that kind of makes that better is brilliant. So we've seen quite a lot of that. Moving up from that, obviously a lot of interview scheduling, interview note taking, those kind of things. Seeing some great stuff done with AI, just in terms of kind of aggregating all of the interview data. Being able to coach people on how to interview better, and just kind of get a picture of interviewing that we've never been able to have before. I think that's really interesting. We're also seeing it in sourcing, using AI to try and find more candidates, all those kind of things. But I think that the really interesting cutting edge uses of it have been in some of the high volume hiring spaces. So I can think of sort of 2 or 3 examples of this, fast food restaurants, healthcare, and sort of generally places where the same job is being hired for on a kind of a repeatable basis, and there. In some cases, we've seen, almost full automation of the first part of that process. So dealing with all the applications, screening and scoring, people who apply, dealing with the whole first screening. And I've seen that done via text. I've seen that done by voice calls, and taking things through to that sort of hiring manager interview stage, and doing that incredibly successfully. I think that we hear a lot of stories about how that goes wrong, and not enough stories about some of the companies who are doing this really, really well and getting, some phenomenal results. So I think that that's been really interesting to watch the organizations that are doing that. But they tend to be, high volume hiring where the same job is being recruited for again and again and again.
Yeah. Do you think it's actually problematic that the media is always going to pick up on the stories that go wrong versus the success stories? Do you think that's warped reality?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because I think that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, there's lots of things to be worried about when it comes to
yes.
when it comes to AI, and there are lots of things that are happening that perhaps shouldn't be happening. But that said, there is a danger that, are we holding some of these machines to a much higher standard than we're holding humans? So humans make mistakes in recruitment processes all the time, and I'm sure if you looked at some of those processes that have been, partially automated up to that hiring manager stage, they're not automated kind of beyond that. I'm sure that the quality, in fact, I know that the quality of the candidate experience is infinitely better, because people are getting transparent communication. It's happening quicker. And I'm sure there are mistakes occasionally, but, probably less than there would be with humans. So I think it's a really nuanced situation. And I think that we live in a social media world where people want to pounce on something and immediately have an opinion one way or the other. And I think that's one of the issues, because it is a very complicated sort of environment out there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting thought or question, like, are we holding machines to a higher standard than we hold humans? That's not a conversation I have on a regular basis. It's a really interesting thought.
And we should.
Yeah.
We absolutely should. But I think at the same time, we should be very aware of the shortcomings of the recruitment process as it is at the moment.
Yes.
I think in an ideal world, if every candidate could have a one-on-one conversation with every recruiter and get full and frank feedback for every kind of interaction they have, then of course humans could do that better. But that's not the situation we're in. We're in a situation where the candidate experience is terrible. People are... job searches affect people's mental health because it's so bad. And actually, if there's technology that can make that better, maybe not as good as a one-on-one human conversation every time, then we should be using it.
Agree. You mentioned hype earlier, Matt. I think you'll probably have seen a lot of tech hype over the years in talent acquisition. What's different or not different about the AI wave?
As I said, it's faster. I think that's the big thing. I think what's interesting, and I've noticed this this year more than anything else. So I think last year, if you kind of take as a barometer walking around a recruiting technology conference, an HR technology conference, last year everyone had to have AI on their stand somewhere with AI, all this kind of stuff. And what I'm noticing this year is people focusing kind of much more, the companies that can, focusing kind of much more on the use cases. And it's a little bit like, I don't know whether you're old enough to remember, but when the internet first came along...
I do remember that moment.
When the internet first came along, people say, companies say, we're on the World Wide Web, we're on the internet, we have a website, and no one says that anymore. So I think that with AI, we kind of hopefully we'll get to that stage where we're not talking about AI, we're talking about, what these systems can deliver, the business value, all those kind of things. I think we're still in we need to talk about AI stage of things, and which creates lots of hype and lots of confusion. And I'm hoping that we will quickly move to another stage where we're talking about use cases and we're talking about results.
And the practicalities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest myth about AI in hiring?
That's a good question. I think one of the things I hear time and time again, which kind of does my head in a little bit, is this kind of well-worn phrase that your job, you won't lose your job to AI, you'll lose your job to a human using AI. So it gets used in recruitment quite a lot. So it's like, you're not going to lose your job to AI because it's never going to replace us humans. You're going to use your job to someone who uses AI. Now, 12 or 18 months ago, I think that I could see that. It's partially true in the short term. I really don't think it's true in the long term, because as things develop, it's very likely that jobs will just change massively, and some jobs will cease to exist. There will be new jobs. It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. So I think that's kind of a fake comfort for people, that they can sort of go away, learn a little bit of AI, and their job is safe, because it may be that their entire profession doesn't exist in a few years' time, or their company doesn't exist, or whatever. So I think that that I think is a myth. And I think it's quite a dangerous one, because it puts people into, it gives people a very false sense of security about what's going on and how quickly some of the change is happening.
And so what should those individuals be thinking about or doing instead of furiously reading up on how to become a prompt expert?
I think it is really important to experiment with some of these tools. There are free versions of them everywhere, and I think it's an appropriate thing to do. But I think that it really is about taking a step back and thinking about asking very difficult questions about your job and your discipline, and saying, can a machine actually do this better than a human? And really digging into that, because a lot of the time, the answers can be quite surprising, that yes, a machine can do that better than a human. And I think that is almost the process you have to go to kind of really understand, where you add value, and, where you can kind of bring value to this sort of emerging world. And it's difficult, because I think we're still fairly in the dark about the timescales of this. So, it may be that this takes years to shake through. It maybe takes months. And I think that's the complicating factor of this. It's very difficult to give a kind of defined timeline. And, the technology has, without doubt, has evolved far quicker than even people I know who work in AI thought it could ever do. But as we know, when you try and look at sort of business adoption and all these kind of things, there are barriers to that. There are kind of unknowns to that. So we just don't really know what the timescales are, which I think is probably the most challenging part of this.
And to go back to that point you made, or the question you asked, can a machine do this better?
Yes.
And the point around, actually, a lot of the time, yes, it can. Is there a particular challenge, do you think, for folk in HR who often get into HR because of the people element?
Yeah.
And I think take pride in that, and in the fact that they know people. They get people, they understand people. And so it can feel, I imagine, quite a jump to then go, the machine could make a better decision about people than I can.
Yeah, and I think it can't always do that. I think that's the thing. And, as long as there are still people in jobs, then those people things are really important. But it's just, I think from an individual perspective, it's there may be things in your job that you kind of hold on to dearly that actually, you should probably let go of because it will be automated or whatever.
Can you give me an example of what that might be?
I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? I think it's a very individual thing. It might be someone who really likes going through CVs or something like that. I don't know. It's kind of a really sort of individual. I think that's kind of quite an individual
Personal.
thing. What I would say from a kind of leadership level, I think it's difficult because people have to look at their sort of talent acquisition function and try and make these decisions on a function basis. And I think that there are kind of like what I call sort of 4 A's in terms of how you think about this. So it's like the first one is automation. What repeatable, easy tasks could we automate straight away, or are we likely to be able to automate in the future? The second one is augmentation, which is where are humans and AI going to work together brilliantly to do things better and faster? And that's probably one area that we haven't really kind of explored as much as we should because the focus has been on automation. And that's just a kind of an adoption thing. So I think that's probably the next big conversation in terms of what happens. And I think anyone who's used some of the more advanced version of these models, so ChatGPT 4.5, deep research, all those kind of things, can see the value that AI can bring to strategic thinking or those kind of things. So there's the augmented factor of it. The third one is amplify, the amplification. So what is it that only humans currently can do really well, and we should dig in and focus on that. Because I think, and this is on a podcast discussion that I've got going live next week, I think one of the problems is people will recognize that automation is coming to various aspects of recruitment. That means additional capacity. And what do you do with that capacity? And a lot of the time, the answer that comes back is quite generic. We're going to focus on high-value activities and the human stuff. And very often people can't actually give an explanation about what that means.
Yes, what does that mean?
And it's important to know what that means. And again, it's going to be different by company, because if you have extra capacity in a business, people start asking questions about that capacity. And I think it's important to be able to do that. So that augmentation, that amplification bit is an important thing to think about. It's like, what is it? It is those humans relationships. And let's not forget, we're dealing with recruitment. It's all about humans, and they need to be persuaded and comfortable to take a new job, because it's a life-changing thing, and it's probably something that people don't want to leave to a machine or anything like that. So I think that kind of persuasion and that relationship building is still such a big thing, and it's kind of like almost old school recruitment from 20 or 30 years ago. That's what recruiters used to focus on before technology. So yes, that amplification bit is kind of important. Then the fourth one is I'd probably call this archive, which is what is it that with this AI revolution, are there things that we do or steps in the process that we take that actually we don't even have to do anymore? Because AI is giving us the ability to kind of sidestep that or do that in a different way or think about recruiting in a different way. So, they kind of go up in order of difficulty in terms of the thinking around them. But I think that's probably a good sort of pathway to think along to try and, get some answers.
I love that model. Automation, augmentation, amplification, and archive. That feels really simple.
Yes.
Yeah.
It feels simple.
In theory.
It is simple in terms of the way it's structured, but there's obviously some kind of deep thinking and difficult kind of decisions in there. But actually, I think if you just have to take a step back and look at it, be as detached as you can and think about it logically. And then it is simpler, but obviously that's kind of difficult because, there's so much emotional involvement in all this kind of thing. So yeah, it can be quite hard.
The point you make on persuasion and relationship building being some of that kind of high value people related stuff, the stuff of the old school recruiter coming back to the fore, I think is a really good one. And I think starts to solve some of the newer problems that certainly some of our clients are seeing around declined job offers, reneges as well, once offers have been accepted. And that's where you can really make a difference. The machine's not going to do that for you, is it?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of really important point. It's that whole, that marketing, that branding, that one-on-one persuasion. That's what recruiting used to be about. I think this is a great opportunity to kind of really focus on that. And I think that the technology just gets us to that place quicker. And whether that's a one-on-one conversation or even things like within recruitment marketing, I think that, we've had sort of new tools and technologies for years, but as an industry, we've always been really bad at implementing them. So it's the ability to send nurturing emails to people. It's just like we're just spamming people even more than we were spamming them before. And I think just taking a really deliberate view on, what's the journey here? How are we talking about what we do? How are we kind of building that rapport first digitally and then personally? I think that's just incredibly important. And I think it just takes the candidate experience conversations to a whole new level. So rather than just talking about, can we give people feedback? How quickly can we go through the process? All that sort of stuff. We can actually talk about how do we want people to feel when this is happening, and how is that kind of working for us, and is that helping with some of those challenges that we have? So, my hope is that it takes these conversations to a much more interesting and deeper level, because the technology can deal with the things that should just be table stakes, like, getting back to people quickly and giving them a sense of where they are in the process and giving them feedback and all that kind of stuff.
Definitely. That good old, people don't remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Matt, you gave a really nice example of what I think would probably feed into your automation, so that first stage of the model earlier, around fully automating that first screening part of the process, which I thought was really interesting. Have you seen augmentation done really well or amplification done really well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that they are related. So I had a podcast interview, I think it was live a couple of weeks ago, with Adecco in Belgium. And they were talking through how they were using AI agents to automate that front part of the process. So they were able to match and score applications, do a kind of a first screening. And then when they got to the sort of the recruiter call, they were able to dive into much more detail, because they didn't have to go through the background check stuff or the basic stuff. And it's kind of an augmentation, because it's the AI has taken away that piece, and it means that there is more room and more time for conversation. I think you have to be quite careful about this sometimes. I mean, it might be going off at a slight tangent, but I've heard of people doing things like just putting CVs straight into the publicly available LLM models, and using that to augment their workflow, and that's a really bad idea for lots of different reasons. So I think it's just kind of really sort of thinking about how AI can help me to do this. So, one area that we haven't talked about is data. We're moving to a world where AI can look at lots of data, very, very quickly. We hopefully will be at a point where we can look at data across the organization. So, and I've spoken to a couple of companies that are kind of at this point or close to this point, where they can actually see what happened to the people that they hire and loop that back to optimize the way that they recruit. And obviously, AI and data is facilitating that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And why shouldn't we be putting CVs into LLMs?
Well, I think this is the whole bit around ethics and risk and all those kind of things. There's obviously quite a few, certainly one in particular, kind of highly publicized court case at the moment around allegedly AI, making decisions about people and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that the software providers who are doing this to the highest ethical standards and all those kind of things are anything around matching. They are putting so much effort into it to ensure that it's explainable and it's transparent. And there are, firstly, ethical reasons why that's important, but there's also legal reasons why that's important. So, we're seeing new legislation come in around the world the whole time, the EU AI Acts and certain kind of American states doing various things. We may one day understand what the UK is going to do, but that's still very much under discussion. But also, as we've kind of seen with some of the issues that have come up, the existing discrimination laws apply to this already. So if you just put stuff straight into a publicly available system that has no kind of guardrails, you've got no idea how it's making decisions, that's a really bad thing to do. And also, I know people who've done research and experiments on this, and actually the results aren't very good anyway. And so, designing systems that can do that is a really complex thing. And there are some great providers out there doing that. And they are, they're audited. They're trying to sort of be as compliant as they could possibly be. So some of these things are really specialized tasks that, because LLMs are almost programmed to be helpful and polite, you may think that you're getting, great information out of them, but actually, there are all kinds of risks with. There are all kinds of risks with this. So I think that's the downside. Around this when you're sort of trying to learn about it.
Absolutely. And so as a TA leader, what are the things that you should be thinking about or the questions you should be asking if you're worried about the ethical part of AI use in recruitment, especially maybe that kind of linked to bias, so wanting to avoid bias?
Yeah, I think that if you're, using a particular vendor, you just have to ask them, very sort of deep questions around the explainability of what they do, the consistency of what they do, what they have put in place to mitigate bias. Can they prove that? Have they had that system audited? I think as time moves on, it will be easier to do this because there'll be a bigger understanding. I think one of the things about the Workday alleged age discrimination process that's going on at the moment is that as it stands, and there are lots of reasons why this may not sort of continue forward, but as it stands, the court that's kind of looked at this to start with has said that actually the software vendor is liable for this rather than the employer, or not just the employer. And I think that's sharpening a lot of people's focus around how they talk about their AI and how they, how they kind of make sure it's ethical and legal. So I think it's a situation that will become clearer and get better as we move forward. But it's just important to, ask some kind of very searching questions about where this is coming from and how it works.
And to go back to your earlier point around noise and marketing spin, how do you make sure that the answers that you're getting don't fall under that category?
I think it is, again, a question of keeping yourself up to date and educating yourselves. I think asking for independent evidence is an important part of this, and we're seeing a rise of companies who are actually auditing these systems and coming back and giving that kind of data. So yeah, I think it's just kind of important to sort of be on top of everything that's happening. I mean, there is no end of discussion about it and resources around it to look at. I just think it's something that you just have to really sort of focus on and think about at the same time. And I think, again, this is the problem with the speed that we're moving at, particularly, HR is very risk averse, as we know. There could be a temptation, and I know some companies are doing this, to stand back and say, do you know what, we're going to wait for legislation. We're going to wait until this is perfectly clear. But unfortunately, this is moving so quickly, and there are companies that are already getting competitive advantage and competitive talent advantage over others by doing it. It's not something that we can wait and see. And also, some of this legislation, some of these court cases could run for years before we have a definitive picture around it. So I think it's understanding the risks, asking the right questions, but at the same time, moving forward with this, because I don't think that organizations can afford to stand still.
Absolutely. How is AI changing the way organizations assess for talent beyond CV reviews?
Yeah, I think I suppose there's a couple of aspects to this. I think the first one is it's changing the volume of applications. So, we know, hearing countless stories of companies being kind of overwhelmed by applications because candidates are using the tools they have available to either apply to lots of jobs very quickly, to tailor application very quickly, to do all the things that we've told them to do for years very, very quickly. So I think that causes a massive issue. That means companies need to think about assessing in different ways. So I think that just the CV review and the interview are being shown up for what they are in terms of, outdated and not appropriate. So my hope would be that it's driving people to look much more broadly at assessment and really understand what's going on. So I think that's one driver for it. I think the other aspect to it is it's great to see assessment companies kind of embracing technology in terms of being able to move faster and being able to, if we look at a scenario where we can push assessment further up the funnel, so people are doing assessments much earlier than, they would have done, previously, right at the final stage or further down. And I think that technology is helping assessment companies do that at scale, which is phenomenal. The issue that I have is, I don't know why I'm telling you this, this, the best assessment companies have peer-reviewed science behind them that's been there for decades. It's always been a very confusing thing to me that we know how to hire people, and it's scientifically we know how to do that, but we don't do it. We just stick to gut feel and CVs and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's important because I think that there are things creeping onto the market where people are designing their own crazy assessment process using AI and all those kind of things. And actually, we already have science that knows how to do this. So there is a kind of a risk, I think, of new science coming into the market that's not being kind of robustly assessed as the science that we already have. So I think there's a number of things. There's a number of things going on.
Why do you think people haven't always adopted the old science?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One kind of structural, one cultural. I think that over, say, the last 20 or 30 years, it's not necessarily been accessible for everyone. So, particularly smaller companies, just in terms of, perhaps the cost, but also maybe the time it takes to actually, design things and do things. So I think that there's been some barriers to entry. I also think that one of the biggest problems that we have with recruitment is the cultural norms that sit behind it. So everyone who has a job has been through a recruitment process, which means everyone has an opinion on how recruitment works. And I think that whenever we sort of try and disrupt that opinion, it seems to cause ruptions everywhere because this is not how recruiting has always been done. So I think there's just this ingrained thing about you need a CV, you need to send your CV, someone needs to give you an interview, and that's how it works. And it doesn't work. So I think it's just this embedded thinking that it kind of really holds it back sometimes. And I would hope that we're now seeing that challenged, and if we see better outcomes, then thinking moves on. But sometimes it's a challenge to do that.
So if we struggle to get them on the old science, how do we get them on the new science?
I think that, to me, the catalyst for this is the way that candidate use of AI is breaking existing processes. Because
you can't not do anything.
Exactly. You can't not do anything about it. Now, it's not evenly distributed. I made a huge error the other week. I was on stage at a conference in Norway talking about this, and I didn't realize that Norway has a massive problem getting anyone to apply for jobs. So when I said, who's getting more applications because of AI? Everyone looked at me in a really blank manner. So, however, I think that it's something that people recognize is happening to a lot of companies. And I think the first phase of this was companies trying to ban people using AI or using detectors to try and find AI. And you can't ban people using AI because it's everywhere. I turn my phone on, it's using AI to do things. And also, I think the amount of false positives that come back from some of these systems that are allegedly detecting AI causes huge issues, and they can't possibly keep up to date with everything that's going on. Also, a CV has so little text on it compared to, I don't know, a book, for example, or something. There isn't that much data to actually go on to work out whether AI has been used to create it. So I think that is a total non-starter. So when you get to that point, you're like, well, how do we fix this problem? And do we blame the candidate? Well, we can't blame the candidate that's using the tools that are available, unless they're using them in a fraudulent way, and that's a different issue. Do we blame AI? Well, 100%, but we can't do anything about it. So we have to blame ourselves. We have to look at the process. We have to do that differently. And I think that different ways of assessing people earlier, using AI to create work scenarios, whatever it might be, it just has to be the way forward. I think it's an obvious step to take.
Have you seen any examples, or are you at all concerned about a potential over-reliance on AI in assessment?
Yeah, I think that there is issues around fraud and cheating, all those kind of things. I mean, I don't know whether I've seen examples of kind of an over-reliance on it necessarily. I'm sure there might be some out there, but again, it's that kind of balance in the process. We still need humans in the process to kind of adjudicate over things and check things aren't going wildly off track. So I think it's always a risk. I think there's a balance to all of these things, but to be honest with you, in most cases, I'm seeing it underused.
Yeah, but I guess the overuse case there, it's kind of full automation, isn't it? Which, I mean, I've never seen any example of at all. I think we're probably far, far away from that. But I guess that's probably what it would look like.
Yeah. And, there are some stories about full automation, in things like temporary roles in factories and things like that, where people are not meeting their boss until the day that they turn up, or their boss is a robot. But it's not a widespread thing. I think that a lot of the companies I've talked to on the podcast who are down this automation route are very clear about where their humans fit into the system. Mm-hmm. And they're very clear that actually the human aspect of this is very important, because ultimately, people have to work with teams, with other humans, with all those people. And it's important to take that into account along with everything else.
You mentioned briefly there, sort of candidates using AI fraudulently. What does that look like?
I think we're starting to see all kinds of cases of people sending fake video avatars to do interviews for them, misrepresenting everything from misrepresenting the skills that they have to all the way through to, fraudulently inventing individuals. And, there are lots of motivations behind that. It could be someone who's just trying to find a job. But I think we're in a very sinister cyber warfare period where people could be putting employees into corporations to hack systems and cause huge amounts of damage. And we've seen some horrendous sort of cyber attacks recently on organizations. So I think it can look like a lot of different things. Things like fake videos, fake voices, fake CVs, all those kind of things are potentially a big issue.
And what should we be doing about them? How do we mitigate against those risks, or the risks that presents?
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that I'm seeing ongoing at the moment. I'm seeing more examples of people talking about it than I'm seeing solutions coming to it. I mean, in the moment, there's some simple things you can do about getting people to put their hand in front of their faces when they're video interviewing and all that kind of stuff. But eventually the technology kind of outpaces that. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops, really. But I think it's going to be something that is important, whether it's in some kind of more rigorous background checking or whatever. It's something that people need to be thinking about.
And is this where the augmentation helps as well? Because if you've got a human then coming in post-automation, are they going to be better able to pick up on what might have happened in a process to date where someone has try to cheat?
Yeah, I think it is a good example. And I think that if we're just talking about background checks, for example, the technology around that in terms of what you can find out about people and all those things is incredibly sophisticated now. So I think it's, I think the tools are there. The humans can, look at what's going on and take that kind of view, whether it's a fraud checker or a quality controller or an experience, whatever it might be. Yeah, that is definitely a role for the future.
And do you think AI will push more companies towards a skills-based or skills-first hiring model rather than experience credentials?
I certainly hope so. I think it makes logical sense to do that. I think there are lots of reasons why companies would want to do that anyway, other than just the technology. But from a technology perspective, a skill is like it's a unit of measurement that a machine can understand. And I think that is why there's such a correlation between, AI and skills. And I think that this is where potentially technology has an advantage over humans in terms of pattern spotting. So spotting people who work in completely different industries, doing completely different things, and being able to make a leap and say, actually, that person is going to be superb at this job because of all the skills data that we've got. And that's where I think humans think they can do that. Some humans can do that to a certain extent, but there is just so much bias and so much subjectivity. I think that this is where a machine can really excel. And also, I think that technology is changing work and business so quickly, it means that skills are going out of date quicker, which means it's forcing companies to look at things from a skills perspective rather than an experience perspective or credentials perspective, because things are moving so fast. So technology is actually making this happen as well as helping solve it.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
There was a moment on one of your recent episodes of Recruiting Future where you acknowledged that whilst what is already possible with AI is incredible, what's even more incredible is what is going to be possible in the not so distant future. What do you think will have the biggest impact on talent acquisition in the next few years?
Yeah, good question. I think that I had an episode where we were talking about AI being underhyped, which is sounds strange because we've been talking about hype so much, but I think it is. I think that it has the capacity to fundamentally change the way that we think about recruiting. So I think if you take, what does that look like? I'm not entirely sure. However, if you take all the elements that we've been talking about, so we're talking about, faster automated things. We've been talking about skills as a unit of measurement. If you kind of put them all together and in a situation where, the technology is even better than it is now, I think it does some fundamentally interesting things. So, the ability to, have agents that can run all of these processes, the ability to pull in data from sources we've not thought about before. So, let's look into all the HR data in a company and actually use that to inform our recruiting strategy in real time. Those kind of things are just game changers. They're things that we can't even think about. Do we get to a point where people don't have to apply for a job at all? Jobs just find them based on their skills. And, we're obviously companies are trying to move to that with internal recruiting at the moment. So I just think that going back to my thing about cultural norms, and we always see recruitment in a very linear way, it's always been done like this, is just you blow that out of the water, then I think we could be going to some really interesting places.
Absolutely. And what are the barriers to getting there?
So as I say, there's the mindset barrier. There is a lot of, we do need to think very carefully about adoption rates and legislation and regulation and risk and all those sort of things. I think they always kind of make things perhaps go slower than we think. Also, is the technology good enough? or even if the technology is good enough, is it being implemented well enough for this to happen? So I think that the problem with anyone who kind of pioneers this stuff, as we said right at the beginning, mistakes are amplified. So it's kind of like, oh, we put this system in and it did this, and this was terrible, and let's throw the whole thing out and burn it down to the ground. I think that it's those kind of sort of very structural things and human things that really sort of hold this back. But, as we know, if someone does this and makes a great, use case from it, great case study, then things do move forward. So I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing at the moment is, this whole sense of this agent workforce working within companies. And I think it was Moderna a couple of weeks ago announced that their chief people officer was now in charge of technology as well as people. And that sparked this furious debate about, what's the future of HR look like? Is HR in charge? Is IT in charge? Are the robots in charge? which is staggering. I mean, to think that 20 years ago, if you told me that HR was taking over the technology function of an organization, I would not believe you. But now we're talking about it, we're seeing that happen. So it's just these kind of, massive sort of leaps of thinking that I think, could make us think about this in a very different way.
So, Matt, before we finish up today, we're introducing a new quickfire round to the deep dive. In 10 words or fewer, what's the biggest myth about AI in hiring? I
think is what I said before, that your job will not be replaced by AI, it'll be replaced by someone using AI. I don't know if that's 10 words or less, but...
We'll count them later.
Okay.
Complete the sentence. By 2027, AI will automate X% of the hiring process.
50% across the board, 80% in some cases.
Oh, I want to dig into that now. Go on, we're going to dig in. I know it's supposed to be quick fire, but let's just do a quick pause on quick fire to dig in. 80% in some cases. What cases?
But I think we're seeing it already. The cases that are using AI to screen, to set those things up. They're also using AI for onboarding and things like that, or automating all those kind of tasks. I think if you look at recruiting as a set of tasks, I would say 80% of them are probably automatable or will be automatable.
And do you think that's across the board, or is that more in volume hiring?
I think we'll see it spread out of volume hiring into other types of hiring. It's always difficult to say anything's across the board when it comes to recruitment because it's just so different from industry to industry. The question is always like, what's going to happen to exec recruitment and all those kind of things.
That was exactly where my mind was going.
It's difficult to generalize.
If recruiters could master just one human skill to stay indispensable in an AI world, what should it be?
Persuasion.
Cheat detection in online assessments, essential safeguard or overkill?
Essential safeguard.
Correct answer.
Good.
Name one AI feature you wish every talent acquisition platform shipped tomorrow.
The ability to use company data to set recruitment strategy.
Oh, I like that. That's a strong response. Yes, please. Matt, thank you so much for your time today. A really interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And I'm sure our lovely listeners will have got a lot out of that. If our listeners would like to hear more from you or get in touch, what's the best way to do so?
So check out my podcast, Recruiting Future. Just search for Recruiting Future wherever you listen to podcasts. And other than that, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you.
My pleasure.
If you found today's conversation valuable, you can find related articles in the show notes and other episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Like, follow, subscribe, and we'll be back soon for more great insights on the Deep Dive.